I'm Any New Province, and this week I want to find out if Arcane Flight is possibly Pauper Playable. Arcane Flight comes from the most recently released set, Dominaria. It costs 1 blue mana for an aura that gives a creature +1/+1 and flying. Arcane Flight seems pretty simple at first. It makes a creature a little bit bigger and gives it evasion so that it's easier for your pumped up creature to get in for damage. What made building around Arcane Flight difficult is that we already have tons of decks to take inspiration from, like Mono-White Heroic, Boggles, or even Blue-White Prowess. I had a ton of fun trying to balance all of the ideas and strategies that those decks have already been successful with. What resulted was a deck that I like to call Arcane Auras. The biggest difference between this deck and decks like Mono-White Heroic and Boggles is that we have a ton of ways to cantrip and hopefully make the deck a little bit more consistent. Still, our plan is very much the same as the decks I've mentioned. We're trying to stick a threat, protect it a little bit, and pump it up to swing in for the win. I'll explain what threats I've chosen first. We'll start with Fencing Ace, which is 1 and a white for a 1/1 that has double strike. It's a new downshift, and I can't wait to see what a bit of evasion can do for this creature. We also have Seeker of the Way, which costs 1 and a white for a 2/2 with prowess, which means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. That's pretty much good enough on its own, but also when you cast a non-creature spell, Seeker of the Way gets lifelink until end of turn. These creatures are similar in the sense that whenever they connect with your opponent, they deal double the damage in terms of the absolute life swing. Seeker of the Way gains you that life back, while Fencing Ace just pokes it straight away from your opponent's life total. Our other threats are a little more based on value. First, we have Jezzian Thief, which costs 2 and a blue for a 1/3 with prowess, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. One of the ways Arcane Flight is such a cool card to build around is it allows you to think, what if a creature could deal combat damage to a player a little more often? Jezzian Thief is a creature that really pays you off for giving an evasion, so hopefully we'll draw a lot of cards off of this one. Our last real threat is Core Skyfisher. It costs 1 and a white for a 2/3 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. It doesn't seem super intuitive to include Core Skyfisher yet, but I'll show you some of the permanents we're going to be bouncing for value later. Rounding off our creature base, we have a 2/2 split with our 1-drops. This is something I'm still agonizing over, but I hope the balance is correct. You should tell me in the comments down below if you changed the creature base for this deck at all. Our first 1-drop is Thraben Inspector. It costs 1 white for a 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you investigate, which means you get an artifact clue token that you can pay to, tap, and sacrifice to draw a card. We've also got Sacred Cat, which costs 1 white for a 1/1 with lifelink. It also has Embalm. You can pay 1 white, exile it from your graveyard, and create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a white zombie cat with no mana cost. You can only Embalm as a sorcery. Sacred Cat is an awesome card in our current metagame. There's a lot of blue-black control trying to kill your creatures, so this ensures we always have a creature on board. Also, if you try to cast Sacred Cat and it gets countered at first, you can still Embalm it out of your graveyard and then Boggle it up with auras. Speaking of auras, we've got a ton of those too. First, we have Cartouche of Knowledge, which costs 1 and a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. This really helps. If your opponent can remove the creature that the aura is attached to, it's usually a 2-for-1. However, Cartouche of Knowledge just replaces itself. Also, the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and flying. Cartouche of Knowledge is a great backup to Arcane Flight. It still pumps our creature and gives it flying, and it even replaces itself. This card was performing so well that I even tried to include a couple of copies of Spreading Seas to go along with our core Skyfishers as well. Next up, we have Chomano's Blessing, which costs 2 white. You can cast it anytime you could cast an instant spell. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a color. You can give the creature that it's enchanting protection from that color. We've seen a lot of Chomano's Blessing in Mono-White Heroic. It's not a very big cost to play something that costs 2 white and gives a creature protection from a color besides white. It's awkward in our deck because we have 2 colors to cover. If we give our creature protection from white or blue, we could shut down a good portion of our deck. We've also got Hyena Umbra, which costs 1 white to give enchanted creature +1/+1 and first strike, but the most important part of this spell is Totem Armor. If the enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. This card is much less risky than Chomano's Blessing in our deck, even though it lacks the same amount of versatility. Still, we can pop this on a creature and get in the way of a Delver of Secrets without worrying about losing it because it has first strike. Also, it just fogs a bunch of your opponent's removal. We're adding another cartouche to the mix with Cartouche of Solidarity. It costs 1 white, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 white creature token with Vigilance. Also, the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has first strike. This is one of my favorite recursion targets for Core Skyfisher. It can trigger your prowess again, it gives you another body for chump blocking, and it pumps up a different creature if you need it to. Our final non-land card is another aura, and arguably the most powerful one in our deck. This is Ethereal Armor. It costs 1 white, an enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, and has first strike. This is the aura that allows us to have incredibly explosive starts. You can stick this on a fencing ace, maybe give it flying, and then cantrip into more auras with your Cartouche of Knowledges. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. First, we have 4 copies of Ash Barrens. I think I can justify this over Evolving Wilds because we're so much lighter on blue than we are on white. We're also running 2 Azorius Chanceries, your Karoo lands. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, you return a land you control to your hand. When they become untapped, you add blue and white. I have 2 Azorius Chanceries while they're a bit slow because we're cheating on our mana really badly. We have 2 Secluded Steps, white cycling lands. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they become untapped, they add a white, and you can pay 1 white and discard them from your hand to get a new card if you don't need any more lands. And our last non-basics are Tranquil Coves, your standard Pauper duels in blue and white. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, they gain you a life, and when they become untapped, they can add blue or white. Finally, for our basic lands, we have 7 plains and 3 islands. We have way more untapped white sources because we want to hit our Seekers, our Fencing Aces, our Thraben Inspectors, and our Sacred Cats on time. Let's have a look at this sideboard. This was another difficult part of the deck to put together. Like I said before, I took inspiration from a ton of different strategies. Each of those strategies have their own pace, tempo, and matchup, so it was kind of hard to amalgamate them into a standard sideboard plan. We have 2 Fragmentized, just very efficient artifact or enchantment removal. We have 2 Relic of Progenitus for controlling the graveyard of our Tron, Monarch, or blue-black opponents. We have 3 Hydroblasts for really shoring up that burn matchup, or maybe we'll run into some red deck wins. We have a Holy Light if our opponent's going wide with elves, or if they have a bunch of X1s with something like Rally Gaunt. We have 2 Journey to Nowheres if we have to exile our opponent's threats, or if they have an Ulamog's Crusher or something. We have 2 Chomano's Blessings and a God's Willing for more protection spells. If our opponent is on a monocolored deck that isn't blue or white, it's a lot less risky to have these protection effects. And finally, we have 2 Standard Bearers for just shutting down any deck that has abilities or spells that want to target their own creatures. And there you have it, Arcane Auras. We're going to be taking this deck live into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince this Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. We're there every Tuesday night playing Possibly Pauper Playable decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you're enjoying everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.